Welcome back to Crime Time Inc. We're revisiting a case that I think really shook the UK to its core, the Soham murders back in 2002. You probably know the basics, but today we're going to kind of go beyond the headlines. We're going to be focusing on those events that kind of led up to the murders themselves and the investigation that resulted in the arrests of Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. We've got court transcripts, investigation reports, and media coverage. All helping us piece this intricate story together.
What is so fascinating about this case is that it all starts with, seemingly ordinary choices.
Yeah.
And they set in motion this chain of events. It's devastating.
Totally. And our story starts on a sunny Sunday, August 4th, 2002, in the quiet town of Soham. 10-year-old best friends, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, were enjoying a barbecue at Holly's house. Families were out enjoying the weather. Kids were playing typical summer scene.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that this day would turn into a national nightmare.
Yeah, and it was a seemingly insignificant act that really set this whole tragedy in motion. Holly and Jessica decided to just, slip out.
Oh, wow.
To buy sweets from a local shop.
Yeah.
Their parents didn't even realize they were gone at first.
Really?
Yeah, they thought the girls were just playing in Holly's bedroom. And this innocent act became the catalyst for their disappearance.
Right.
Initially, the search focused on maybe they were hiding or playing nearby.
Yeah.
But as time went on and there was still no sign of the girls, the community, and the police, they mobilized.
Yeah.
This search quickly escalated into this massive undertaking. Hundreds of volunteers joined in the effort alongside police from multiple forces. They had helicopters. The media was involved. Everybody was desperate to find Holly and Jessica.
And with each passing day, the hope, I imagine, began to dwindle. It's truly heartbreaking to even think about what those families must have been going through as, days turned into weeks. Can you tell us about some of the leads that were investigated during those initial weeks?
Certainly. So the police followed every lead, no matter how small. They were always hoping for a breakthrough.
Yeah.
There were reports of a possible abduction. There was a 6-year-old girl that had disappeared a few days earlier.
Oh, wow.
So this led the police to investigate areas near a local football club where there were reported sightings.
Okay.
They even had a tip about a driver struggling to control 2 children in his car.
Oh, gosh.
Then they looked into the possibility that the girls might have arranged to meet someone from an online chat room. All these leads, they had to be thoroughly examined. But in the end, they all led to nothing.
So amidst all this chaos and uncertainty, Ian Huntley enters the scene. Huntley, a 28-year-old caretaker at Soham Village College, actually kind of inserts himself into the investigation.
Yeah.
He told police that he'd had this, brief, seemingly innocent conversation with the girls on his doorstep that Sunday afternoon.
He even publicly expressed condolences to Holly's father.
Gosh, that's just unbelievable.
To think that someone involved could behave so audaciously.
I know.
Yeah. Trying to position himself as, this helpful witness.
Yeah.
Concerned about the girls' well-being.
It's almost like classic tactic, isn't it?
Yeah.
To deflect suspicion. Insert yourself into the narrative. Vain concern.
Blend in.
Yeah, blend in with the worried community.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, Huntley's helpful demeanor would soon crumble under scrutiny. What were some of those red flags that investigators began to notice?
So, for starters, there were inconsistencies in his statements to the police. He kept changing his story about his interaction with the girls, and his behavior just became increasingly suspicious. He started excessively cleaning his house and car, almost as if he was trying to dispose of evidence. And then came a major development. The police discovered the girls' burnt clothing in a bin at the school where Huntley worked.
So that must have completely changed the course of the investigation.
Absolutely. This discovery shifted Huntley from being a potentially helpful witness to the prime suspect. And at this point, the investigation also turned towards his girlfriend, Maxine Carr.
Now, Maxine Carr was Huntley's girlfriend and a former teaching assistant at Holly and Jessica's school. Initially, she provided Huntley with a false alibi, claiming that she was with him in Soham when the girls disappeared. What can you tell us about the alibi and how it unraveled?
So her story quickly fell apart. Several eyewitnesses placed her in Grimsby, miles away from Soham, on the day of the disappearances.
Oh, wow.
They also had cell phone records and other evidence that contradicted her statements. It completely dismantled her alibi.
The web of lies was closing in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Faced with this mountain of evidence, Carr confessed to the police. She admitted that Huntley had told her the girls had been in their house.
So that must have been a major turning point in the investigation.
It was a huge revelation, and just as the investigation was reeling from this news, there was another devastating discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears.
the discovery of the girls' bodies.
Yes. On August 17th, 2002, their bodies were found in an irrigation ditch near RAF Lakenheath, miles away from Soham. The location itself was significant. Huntley had claimed it was near his grandmother's house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, possibly in an attempt to, construct a plausible reason for being in the area, but the forensic evidence just irrefutably linked Huntley to the crime.
What specifically did the forensic evidence reveal?
They found Huntley's fingerprints on the bin that contained the girl's clothes.
Wow.
They also discovered traces of blood in his house and car, directly linking him to the crimes. The evidence against him was overwhelming.
So it seems that both Huntley and Carr were caught in their own, web of deceit.
Exactly.
Yeah, the game was up. I think we need to discuss Maxine Carr's role in all this, right?
Yeah.
After all, she provided him with that false alibi.
Right.
Her involvement in this case, although not directly in the murders themselves, really raises questions about deception, loyalty, and how far some people will go to protect those they love, even in the face of horrific acts.
Yeah.
Let's explore Maxine Carr's role in more detail.
It's certainly a complex aspect of the case. To really try to understand Maxine Carr's actions, we need to look closely at her relationship with Huntley,
Right.
their personalities, and the dynamic between them.
Okay, so rather than some, criminal mastermind,
Right.
It sounds like she was more someone caught in this web, spun by a really manipulative partner. Would you agree?
That's certainly a plausible interpretation. She was young. She'd had a history of troubled relationships, which likely made her, more vulnerable to Huntley's charms. He was, by many accounts, charismatic, manipulative,
Right.
adept at presenting himself as that caring boyfriend who could provide the security she so desperately seemed to need.
Yeah, but how could she have been so oblivious to his, darker side?
Right.
There must have been signs, right?
It's important to remember that Huntley was very skilled at concealing his true nature.
Yeah.
He was a master manipulator who just presented this facade of normalcy to the world. I mean, he was even practiced at appearing innocent and charming during police interviews. He fooled a lot of people.
Wow, I can see how someone, especially someone seeking stability, affection, could fall prey to that kind of manipulation.
Exactly. And Maxine, maybe blinded by her desire for a stable relationship, chose to believe his lies, even when those lies became increasingly, outlandish. It's almost as if she was living in a fantasy world, refusing to acknowledge the horrific reality of his actions.
That's a really insightful point. I suppose it's also worth considering the role of fear in this situation as well, right?
Right.
We know that Huntley had a history of violence, controlling behavior. It's possible that Carr felt trapped and scared to even challenge him, even when, deep down she knew that something was terribly wrong.
It's certainly possible. It seems she was trapped in a very unhealthy relationship
Right.
with a dangerous man and sadly made choices that led to devastating consequences.
And ultimately those choices led to her imprisonment.
Yes. She was convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice. She was sentenced to 3.5 years.
Wow.
And while she wasn't directly involved in the murders, her actions did help Huntley evade capture for those crucial 2 weeks.
2 weeks that must have been just agonizing for the families of Holly and Jessica.
Absolutely. And while Carr's sentence may seem lenient compared to Huntley's life sentence, it's crucial to remember that she too became a victim of his manipulation. She lost her freedom, her reputation, and ultimately her sense of self. She was actually granted lifelong anonymity upon her release. The Soham murders, they left scars on many lives, extending far beyond the immediate victims and their families.
Yeah.
The case really exposed a collective vulnerability. That unsettling realization that individuals capable of horrific acts can be hiding in plain sight, even in the most ordinary of places.
This case brought to light some really serious flaws in the systems designed to protect children, particularly when it comes to information sharing and record keeping.
Right.
These failings allowed someone like Huntley to just slip through the cracks,
Right.
despite a very disturbing history of inappropriate behavior. Can you elaborate on how this was even possible?
Certainly. It is alarming how easily Huntley was able to exploit these gaps in the system. His past was littered with red flags. We know from court transcripts and investigation reports that he had this pattern of predatory behavior toward young girls. He had been accused of sexual assault and rape on multiple occasions, and was even charged with burglary, a charge to which he later admitted, yet he was still able to secure a job at a school.
I mean, how is that even possible? You'd think there'd be such rigorous background checks,
Right.
especially for someone working in a school environment.
You would think so, but there were some major systemic issues at play here. The background check process was just riddled with errors.
Okay.
It's astonishing how many things went wrong. To start, Huntley applied for the caretaker position at Soham Village College under the name Ian Nixon. Now, Cambridgeshire Constabulary, the force responsible for background checks, they did try to contact Humberside Police, Huntley's local force, to obtain information about him.
So they were aware of his previous address and alias.
They were. But here's where the process really broke down. Cambridgeshire Constabulary relied on a system that was already overwhelmed with requests and hampered by staff shortages, confusing procedures, and inadequate training. There wasn't a clear protocol in place for managing vetting requests, particularly those involving other police forces. It seems their requests simply disappeared into a sea of bureaucracy.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Unfortunately, yes. And to make matters worse, Humberside Police's own intelligence system was in a state of disarray. They had information on Huntley going back to 1995, including those allegations of sexual assault against underage girls.
They had all this information, but it wasn't accessible to other forces?
No, it wasn't. Their main intelligence system, known as CIS nominals, was poorly managed. Records were incomplete, entered incorrectly, or even deleted prematurely.
Deleted. Why on earth would they delete crucial information like that?
Their procedures for reviewing and deleting records were unclear and inconsistently applied. Some records were automatically deleted after a certain time, regardless of their content. Officers often weren't sure which records to keep or for how long, which resulted in a haphazard approach to information management.
It sounds like there were significant issues with how police intelligence was shared nationally as well.
You're right. The lack of a robust national system for sharing police intelligence only magnified the problem. Each force relied on its own separate databases and procedures, making it extremely difficult to obtain a comprehensive view of an individual's criminal history.
So Huntley was basically able to exploit these systemic weaknesses.
Exactly. The combination of human error, systemic failings, and the lack of clear national guidelines created a perfect storm that allowed Huntley to evade detection and secure a position of trust at a school.
It's truly devastating to think that these young lives could have been spared if the system had just functioned as it should have.
It's a heartbreaking truth, and it raises serious questions about how we can better protect our children from individuals who pose a threat to their safety.
Right.
The Soham case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, communication, and accountability. It highlights the need for strong systems to protect children and vulnerable individuals, systems that are not easily compromised by human error or deliberate deceit.
It's clear that the Soham murders had a profound impact on the UK. It forced like a reevaluation of child protection policies and procedures. Would you agree?
It's true. The Soham tragedy prompted a much-needed national conversation about safeguarding our most vulnerable citizens.
This case is truly a tragedy on multiple levels. We've explored the events leading up to the murders, the flawed investigation, the roles of Huntley and Carr, and the systemic failings that allowed this to happen. But what I think is so crucial for our listeners to grasp is how we, as a society, can learn from this tragedy and prevent similar events from occurring in the future.
That's an excellent point. I think one of the most important takeaways from this case is the importance of speaking up and reporting any concerning behavior. We need to create a culture where individuals feel empowered to report suspicions without fear of reprisal or being dismissed.
That's an essential step towards creating safer environments for children.
Absolutely. And we also need to advocate for continuous improvements in background check systems. We need to demand better training for those responsible for conducting these checks, ensure that information is shared effectively between agencies, and implement safeguards to prevent the deletion or misfiling of crucial information.
Those are all critical steps in the right direction. What other lessons can we draw from this case?
Well, we also need to educate ourselves and our communities about the signs of grooming and predatory behavior. We often think of predators as strangers lurking in the shadows, but in reality, they can be anyone, even those in positions of trust.
That's such a crucial point. How can we empower individuals to, recognize and report those signs?
There are many resources available that provide information about the different tactics predators use, the warning signs to watch out for, and steps to take if you suspect someone is being groomed or abused. It's also important to teach children about personal safety and empower them to speak up if someone makes them feel uncomfortable or unsafe.
These are all excellent points, and I really hope our listeners take them to heart.
I agree. We need to remember that safeguarding children is collective responsibility. By understanding the complexities of cases like the Soham murders, advocating for systemic change, and fostering a culture of vigilance and communication, we can work toward preventing future tragedies.
So we've been talking about how the Soham murders expose some really serious vulnerabilities in those systems that are meant to protect children. It's clear that this whole combination of like human error and flaws in the system and a lack of clear national guidelines, it all allowed Ian Huntley to kind of evade detection
Right.
and get a job at a school despite his past.
Absolutely. And the Soham tragedy really served as a wake-up call, didn't it? I mean, it
Yeah.
prompted a national conversation about these child protection policies and procedures.
Hmm.
And the subsequent Bichard inquiry, which was launched after the murders, played a crucial role in bringing all of these failings to light.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the Bichard inquiry and the impact it had on child protection policies in the UK?
Sure. So the Bichard inquiry, it was a really comprehensive investigation into the circumstances that allowed Huntley to be employed at Soham Village College despite that history of alleged sexual offenses. And the inquiry, it uncovered a whole series of missed opportunities, communication breakdowns, and just systemic weaknesses that ultimately allowed him to slip through the cracks.
What were some of those key findings of the inquiry?
Well, the inquiry identified a number of critical failings, including things like inadequate vetting procedures and poor record keeping, and also a lack of effective communication between police forces and other relevant agencies. It also highlighted the need for a much more robust national system for sharing police intelligence and criminal records.
It sounds like they really needed a systemic overhaul.
Yeah, they did. And the inquiry's recommendations led to some really significant changes in child protection policies and practices across the whole UK. For example, they established the Independent Safeguarding Authority, or ISA.
Right.
And they oversee the vetting and barring of individuals who work with children or vulnerable adults.
So the ISA now plays a central role in preventing individuals with a history of, harmful behavior from gaining access to those positions of trust.
That's right. The ISA has the power to bar individuals from working with children if they pose a risk of harm. This includes individuals with criminal convictions, cautions, or allegations of abuse. So the establishment of the ISA was a direct response to those failings exposed by the Soham murders.
What other changes were implemented as a result of the inquiry?
Well, the Bichard inquiry also led to improvements in information sharing
Okay.
between police forces, local authorities, and other agencies that are all involved in child protection. So they introduced new guidelines to make sure that all the crucial information about individuals who pose a risk to children is shared promptly and effectively. This included developing more sophisticated databases and communication systems.
So these changes, they represent a pretty significant step forward in preventing similar tragedies from happening, right? The Soham murders, they were a real watershed moment for child protection in the UK. The tragic loss of Holly and Jessica led to this fundamental shift in the way that we safeguard children and vulnerable individuals.
And while those changes are definitely positive, I think it's also important to acknowledge that no system is perfect.
Yeah.
We still have to remain vigilant and continue to advocate for these improvements in child protection policies.
I completely agree. It's this ongoing process that needs constant evaluation and adaptation. We have to make sure that the lessons that we learn from cases like the Soham murders, that they're embedded in our systems and practices so that we can provide the best possible protection for children.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today.
Yeah.
This has been, a very sobering conversation, but incredibly important. I think the Soham murders really do serve as a reminder of just how important vigilance, communication, and accountability are when it comes to protecting kids.
It's been a pleasure to join you today. It's so important that we never forget the tragic loss of Holly and Jessica, and we have to continue to learn from the past so that we can create a safer future for all.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Crime Time, Inc. for this very difficult but crucial conversation. We hope that by shining a light on this tragedy, we can all play a part in protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. And that concludes our program for today. We hope you'll join us again next time for another compelling case on Crime Time, Inc.